Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to a special guest episode with Dr. John Baker. And today we are going to talk about pivoting and living an aligned life that might be out of the ordinary or unexpected. And John and I have known each other in the virtual world for quite a while, and we recently did a podcast together on her podcast, which is called the Lean Out Podcast, and the episode is Mindful with Jessie Mahoney, if you want to hear more about that conversation. And with that, let's dive into our conversation today, and let's just start by having you introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, Jesse, it's great to see you again, and thank you for having me on your show. I am a big fan and have been listening for quite some time. I am Dawn Baker. I am one of those people who I would consider to be multi-passionate. I have a friend who I was at her daughter's birthday party, and she introduced me to some of the other parents there, and she said, "This is my friend Dawn. She has like 5 jobs." And that was the way that she described me. So I am an anesthesiologist by training, formerly an engineer, and I still practice anesthesiology on a very part-time basis, but I have a unique lifestyle going currently. I live on an 80-acre homestead in the Alpine Mountains of southern Utah, where I manage that property with my husband, and I have a 9-year-old daughter who I homeschool. I teach yoga classes at a local studio. I also have a non-clinical arm of the things that I do for physicians, which is in the aspects of work-life balance and physician wellness. I am an author. I have a blog. I have a podcast, as you mentioned, and I do speaking, conferences and retreats and things like that in those areas. And I coach physicians and other women professionals one-on-one in the areas of work-life balance and career transition.
I multi-passionate is one of my favorite words. So I'm so excited that you use that, and it feels like a great place to start because I think often when I was moving through my career in a big healthcare institution, multi-passionate was actually seen so almost as a negative in that I had too many things I was interested in, and you had to narrow it down and sort of choose who you wanted to be. And so I would love to hear, how did you give yourself permission to be someone who jumps into all of your passions? And because you mentioned this idea of work-life balance, how do you figure out what balance looks like with at least 5 jobs there, maybe more?
Well, I will say that it is fairly a long story, the way that I gave myself permission. I think I've always been one of those people that likes lots of different things and isn't very obsessed with one thing. Ever since I was a young adult, I had multiple different interests. I played music. At the same time, I was getting into athletics. I started doing rock climbing and traveling with my husband, who at that time was my boyfriend. And I loved academics, I loved learning. So I wanted to do all of the things. And I realized that early on that the path of engineering wasn't going to be able to be enough of freedom for me in terms of where I could do my work. You really are pigeonholed when you do engineering. It's kind of like getting into a very niche specialty of medicine where you need to practice in a very specific type of institution or location. That's how all of engineering is. If you do petrochemicals, you live in this particular place. If you do biotech, you live in a different place. And I really wanted something that would allow me the freedom to maybe be able to take long periods of time off. At that time, we were just really into the rock climbing and the adventuring. So
Mhm.
I went into medicine. And that was my idea, was that I was going to get freedom from medicine, which a lot of people in medicine are like, what? Medicine
That's
is
so
free.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's ironic because then I found myself when I was in the medical training, just like a lot of us do, getting on that, what I call the treadmill of achievement,
Yep.
where you are conditioned to be pigeonholed. Again, you are conditioned to, like you said, not be multi-passionate, to
Mhm.
ignore certain parts of your life just in order to learn the things that you need to learn, and then to focus on whatever it ends up being, like research or clinical work or developing a procedure or something like that. And so I did get off track a little bit during my training, but what put me back on track to my original vision and being okay with living a life less ordinary, like I say, is that I had a significant health scare during my residency training. I found myself in a place in my mid 30s, because I was a little later in my training, where I wanted to start a family and I was having trouble doing so. I was struggling with energy levels. So a lot of people have that with, everyone being on the continuum of burnout. But it turned out, to make a long story short, that my struggle with energy levels and focus had an organic cause, and it was a large pituitary tumor that was compressing my optic nerve, causing me to have blindness, and subsequently was causing issues with my procedural performance on residency. I also, was significantly fatigued, as I said, and this was probably related to this tumor. So I had to take a significant amount of time off to recuperate and to heal. During that time, I became very focused on learning more about myself, on learning mindfulness techniques, on accepting my identity, which is not just being a doctor, not just being the smart one or the athlete or whatever. I mean, when you're knocked on your bum and you're in the OR, and people that supervise you are then taking care of you, and people that you work with are seeing you in a hospital gown and less, it really affects how you feel about yourself, and what you realize your place is in the world. And so that is how I found myself back to myself, basically.
And how often does it seem to take a total crisis of, and sadly, health for many of us? Nietzsche and I just recorded a podcast on how medicine almost killed us, and you could have been in that podcast too, it sounds
Yes.
like. And this is not an unusual story. And I think so often we just sort of write it off as either something we did wrong or something with us, or in these days, maybe it's just burnout. Like, that's what's wrong with me. And on the one hand, it's terrible that it comes around that way. And also, in many ways, I think I feel lucky and she feels lucky. And it sounds like you feel lucky that it early in our career actually gave us quite a decent amount of perspective on the process and leaning into who we are out of what the system is offering and into who we are and what we would like to bring and how we might like to live.
Absolutely. And not only did this experience, which I am forever grateful for, even though it's a difficult experience, I know that it was meant for me to have. It got brought me back to my original vision of my life and realizing what my true values are, but it also opened me up to the ideas of being very self-aware, knowing what I need, realizing that the work can wait. It's not the only thing. And I wanted to help other people with that information because I definitely delayed my own diagnosis. I chalked it up to burnout, and I did start researching, and that was part of how I found mindfulness modalities that work for me, was trying to combat my own burnout, but I had something else going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes the spectrum of burnout is that you actually have full-blown illness, and that was me.
And I think that's one point I often try to make here, and so important that so many people engage in self-help or self-improvement, thinking that, oh, I just haven't done it right, when there's actually something else going on. And I think for most people in medicine, it is very likely a parallel track that we also need to check into our physical health, because many of us have delayed, deferred, um, preventive care, but also just we're so busy we don't even notice. And so things get to a place that are so far down the line. And I think we're also often told that, like, oh, yes, people in medicine make up these diagnoses because they hear them all the time and they think that they have this thing that maybe they don't have. And the importance in your story of looking at both health and physical wellness, as opposed to, in addition to the emotional wellness and the career path.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so this particular tumor that I had to be removed surgically. I had surgery. It left me with permanent infertility. And that affected my life down the line as someone who was trying to have a child as well. And I wanted to mention this because I wrote my book, Lean Out, hoping that people would read it and know that you don't have to wait until a crisis or until you have a health problem or until you have infertility, which is super common among women physicians and other women professionals, before you can take stock of your own situation and figure out what's working, what isn't working, and what do I want to change, and then not being afraid of making those changes.
Mhm. And so what um got you to move beyond the fear and jump into the changes?
It's funny because I always thought that it was kind of this lightning bolt. People would ask me that. They were like, "How did you get to this point where you don't care about what other people think?" And I was like, "Well, I guess it's because I was on the OR table naked in front of my colleagues and it just made me not care or something." And I used to think that that's what it was, or, it was just the process of being ill and like all the things that go along with that and losing the identity of like, I'm this perfect physician and perfect athlete and, perfect smart person or whatever. But it really was more than that. I realize now, more than 10 years later from when this happened, that there was a deliberate self-development process I went through. I learned more about myself. I sat in stillness. I took time for myself. I had time off. It was forced time off, but you don't have to take forced time off, but you need to take some sort of time off. And
The
then
pause.
I made myself stronger mentally, so I worked a lot on questioning my beliefs, on realizing what unwritten rules I was following. Whose rules were they? Were they my rules or were they, from something else, from the medical establishment or from my family or anything like that? And then I also figured out during this process that I could do hard things. I mean, we forget we all can do hard things because we're in medicine and we've gone through all these hoops in order to achieve, but I kind of forgot that I even liked that. And so I started embracing challenge again. I started figuring out ways that I could make goals for myself that weren't related to work. Like, I'm not talking about getting to a pinnacle in your, procedural modality or something like that. I'm talking about like as embracing a challenge, like going out and doing something new that's just for you. That's a challenge that is something that is the enjoyment of the challenge is there. Adopting a new habit, trying a new class, doing something with people you don't know, things like that. And then I would say that the last thing that really helped me was realizing that I needed to take baby steps. And I know that sounds cliche, but realizing that the destination of like, well, when I have this baby, I'm going to be happy. That's a fallacy. When I get my degree, I'm going to be happy. When I finish this certification, I'm going to be happy. I focused on each little moment and it was like, oh, I'm getting healthier. I'm able to get out of the car now without assistance. After my procedure, I felt super weak, physically, things like that. So when you're brought back down to a place of the basics, I think that's helpful in embracing very small steps and realizing micro wins along the way. But that mentality and changing that idea in my mind was very helpful as well.
I love that. So I'm just going to repeat what you said because I think many people want to know the how. And it's interesting because it's not really a how checklist, but it's sort of a list of things that I think are probably essential to a transition. And you talked about a pause, like you actually need space. And sometimes it's a mandated pause because it's a medical thing, or sometimes we have to just pause. I think many people want to know the answer and what they're going to do, but like before they leave. And that's so hard. And sometimes we need to take a pause before something else happens. And then it's really what you do in that pause. And I think that time to invest in your mental strength and time to invest in getting to know yourself again. I use the word invest because we use all our energy for other things. So it's an investment in energy, time, and often many of us invest money into it as well, either working with a coach or doing yoga teacher training. I think many of us think we can do it by ourselves, and yet I don't know anybody who's done something like you have done or I have done by ourselves. We all got help
Yeah.
from lots of different ways, and there isn't one right way, but to really believe that. And then I wanted to just reflect on this do hard things because I think it's so interesting. I try hard not to do hard things anymore, but it's really just with that language. Because interestingly, so many of the things you listed as hard things, other people would think are easy, like spend more time with friends, take a break, learn a new skill, play an instrument. But for those of us that are used to like plowing through, those are actually hard for us.
Yes.
Although I'm really working on this language of like do fun things or do interesting things or do things that make you feel alive, which might be hard. And
Well, you could also say embracing challenge.
yeah, I
I
love
think
that.
that's the idea too. You're
I,
right, do hard things is kind of it's got some connotations.
Well, and I actually love that you use that word because I think in many ways we think so similarly. Like we use the mindfulness, we use the yoga, and yet it's a perfect example of for you, challenge and hard things like helps you get there. And for me, like reacting against challenge and hard things helps me get there. Though in reality, they're hard and they're challenges. Like it's working with the way your brain works. And I love that
Mhm.
sort of it doesn't matter. This isn't a classic way of thinking about like there isn't an exact how, and you use the words and the framework that works for you. I might even say it's doing different things or growing different
Yes.
aspects of yourself. I'm just trying to think of different languages, and then the baby steps. I actually just did yet another coach training with Martha Beck, but she calls them turtle steps, and I'm like, it's the perfect thing. Like people want to know the end, but it's like one step at a time. And in medicine, we are not trained to do that. We're trained to you go to med school, you do residency, you do fellowship, then you do this, and you get somewhere at the end. But when you're following a less ordinary life, there isn't that path. So you just have to take one step and reevaluate, and the next step and reevaluate. And then things might, as you said, knock you on your bum. And then you have to reevaluate again. And I think that is such an unfamiliar path for so many of us that just pausing and recognizing that it's just one foot in front of the other or one turtle step or baby step, whatever your language is that feels um, good to you. So tell us a little bit about how you've made all this really interesting stuff work.
Well, this goes to what you were just saying, which is hard things are relative to
Yeah.
different people. I definitely acknowledge that. So, my situation isn't going to necessarily apply straight to someone else, but I hope it will inspire people to realize that there are different paths out there that you can take as a professional.
Mhm.
So, what I did was after I had my health scare, I didn't even say this earlier, but I was going down a path to becoming a very subspecialized niche anesthesiologist in a particular area. And when I had that health scare, I completely dropped that. I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm not taking these special fellowship boards. I'm not going to do this thing. It was in perioperative echocardiography, and it would have pegged me to live in a very specific place and work only in an academic center, likely. And so I would have been exactly where I didn't want to be. So I stopped doing that and I decided that I would redefine my metrics for success as an anesthesiologist and focus just on patient care, good delivery of patient care, being an efficient clinician, working on general cases, kind of bread and butter type, what we would call that in the operating room, bread and butter cases. And so I sought a job that would give me that kind of a situation. And I found one that was really great for me. And it did happen to be at an academic institution, but it was a job where I did not have to do call, I didn't have to do research, and I didn't have to do administrative work. So I had a purely clinical job. And I thought that was perfect for just starting out. And I really focused on my clinical work. And once my husband and I had my daughter after years of infertility treatments, decided that we wanted to change our lifestyle to live in a more rural setting and look for a property like the one we lived on, I experimented a little bit. I actually took a leave of absence from that academic job by negotiating with them, which is a whole other topic that we could like have a whole conversation about
Yeah.
how to effectively negotiate for something
Yeah.
you want like this. But I did do that. And so during the time that I took off, I experimented with doing locum tenens work because this was pre-COVID, and we weren't really sure if we were gonna buy a rural property. It was one thing we were thinking of, but we were also thinking of doing nomadic travel. And so locum tenens is the way that you can either live far away from your work or you could travel around and still do the work. And I had never done it and I was definitely scared of it. And so what I did was I took on a couple of assignments and tried them deliberately chose shorter assignments.
Mm.
Kinda like when you go into medical school and you're like, "Well, I can get through this 6-week rotation because I
Mhm,
can get through
mhm,
anything for 6 weeks or 4 weeks," or whatever. I looked at it like that, and I didn't pick some crazy huge assignment. I picked something smaller and bite-sized that I could try out, and then I realized that I liked it. It definitely has trade-offs. There are some different aspects of being a travel person where, people don't know you, they may not trust you, but it was also challenging in a new way where it was like, oh, there are limited resources or there's different resources and I need to adapt and be able to do that. And now I really kind of like that part about my job, to be able to go to different hospitals and be like, all right, where is all the stuff,
mhm,
and
mhm.
who do I need to know and who do I need to talk to if something happens? That kind of stuff is very fun and challenging to me too. So I experimented with that. And once I realized that I was okay doing that, it evolved into me ending up leaving my academic job and then going to do per diem and part-time and locum tenens work only.
And so for people who are afraid of locum tenens, what would you tell them? I know so many people who I think it's funny in medicine, we have such hierarchy and we think that like it's not a good job or it's
Mhm.
changed a bit. But there is a lot of fear about being in a place you don't know or traveling or how they'll treat you or just a lot of fear about it. So what would you tell people who maybe want to try that out while they take a pause, which you did at the same time?
Yeah. Well, there are locum tenens positions in all specialties of different lengths. So I will say you may not even need to make any sort of announcements. Like you could try it on like a vacation if you have a vacation period. And I know that seems like not the most fun situation and a lot of us really need our vacation time if we are overworking at this point, but you have to look at the long term like, well, I'm considering a lifestyle change that would then give me more time off and
Mhm.
more freedom time. So let me try this out and I think it's easiest to find a recruiter in the beginning. I have negotiated my own arrangements with hospitals, but I wouldn't recommend that as like a first step. I would say a recruiter is easier because they do everything for you and they do your malpractice and they negotiate the contract for you. And then just trying it out. I mean, that's the only thing you can do. Try take a position that is not too long, that maybe isn't too far away from you, that that you feel okay with the length of time that it is as an experiment, and see if you
Mm,
like it.
yeah.
And I think maybe one might not be enough. Like, wait to see what your experience is with that one. You may need to do another one to see, because sometimes going to a certain place isn't necessarily representative of
Yeah.
what
You
your
could
experience will
have
be.
one that's not a good fit. I love the language experiment. I often say like it's data
Mhm.
collection, and I
Oh,
think in medicine we're scientists, so it's like if we can engage in an experiment
mhm.
without it, being a path that we're choosing. I think that that's just a beautiful, light, kind way to jump into it. And so
Yeah.
now you're doing locum tenens, and tell us what else you do. How do you make this work as I'm in a multi-passionate, less ordinary life?
Yeah, well, I will also say that because of where I live, the nearest place that I can do work is maybe a 3 or a 4 hour drive. So I need to, well, actually, that's not totally true. There is a city that's about 2 hours away, and I have done locum tenens work there before. But currently, I am working in the city of Las Vegas, and that's about 3.5 hours away.
Mhm,
And there are a lot of opportunities there for me, which is why I chose to work there. And I also have a place to stay there because we purchased a condo there a long time ago. And so it works very well for me to be able to go there and to not have to worry about accommodations. So
mm,
I have been keeping my world very small. And I will say that that's one way to do it. You can do locum tenens and per diem work by kind of like putting feelers out everywhere, and you can be not limited in where you're willing to go. But with the family and with the other things that I like to do that you just mentioned, and the other responsibilities that I have, I keep my locums and per diem world really small. And so currently, what that looks like for me is working at a regular per diem job in Las Vegas, one, possibly 2 weeks a month, depending on their needs and on my schedule. And I will go for a period from Sunday night to Saturday morning down there, and I will work Monday through Friday. And I am able to do that also, I will say, because my husband has a remote job and not bring my daughter. So my husband will then take over the childcare duties for the period of time. And, I don't think you need to have a spouse that does that per se. There are other ways that you can work this with childcare, but that's what we do. And then when I'm not doing my anesthesia work, I am scheduling one on one coaching calls, I'm doing content creation, and I'm doing this kind of like at different spurts during the days. I don't have a set schedule like a lot of entrepreneurs. Like I
mhm,
sometimes work at night after my daughter goes to sleep. I'll work on my newsletters. I'll work on my podcast editing, things like that. And of course, when you do coaching, you kind of have to work with your clients' schedules. So that is a little more constrained in doing interviews. But a lot of times I am very creative about the periods of time that I work. I take like a 2 hour block, and like even like on a Sunday night or something, and I'll work during that time.
mhm. And so it sounds like uh, you can rely on yourself to make good decisions, trust yourself, get things done, and do things in a less ordinary way, but still get things done. And I mention that because I hear from so many people that they're so used to structure that they have a fear that if they don't have the structure and they don't have this blocked time and this thing and that thing, they won't get anything done.
That is definitely a challenge, and I have run across that with other coaching clients
Yeah.
who are doing a career transition from something that is more structured to something more like what I do. And I will say that I am not perfect at it. It's a constant process. I definitely do still deal with that issue too of time that I want to be spending doing something else, running into time where I should be,
Mhm.
meeting a deadline or something like that. I think that one thing that is helpful is making sure that you schedule things on your calendar, even if they're things that aren't an actual meeting with someone else. And I tell this to my clients all the time. Well, you want to make a priority in your life of doing a workout X number of days a week. Put the workout in the calendar and put a reminder on it so that you do it. So even when it's like free work like the podcast, you're doing creative work and it's not necessarily it's a deadline that you're self-imposing. You have to just deliberately schedule it to make it happen, or else it ends up not happening because other things fill the time.
And I have found, you mentioned even working at night after your daughter goes to bed. I hear from so many like, I never do my work at home or I never do my work before bed. And I actually see it as like how great that we can be flexible and do it whenever. And so I can tell a story that isn't it better that I can do it at night, but I was able to go out for a hike or garden during the day.
Yeah.
And I think we can have these flexible stories and maybe even be kind to ourselves because I think as physicians in particular, we're incredibly productive people. And it's rare that we just don't do stuff. I do think we don't prioritize ourselves. And so for me, it's making sure that the time potentially for exercise or for making sure I'm outside in the sunlight, if I'm doing something I'm passionate about, I might actually just miss the whole day because I'm enjoying it. But that maybe needs to be scheduled, but for me, the work does get done. I'll just stay up late or do whatever. But it's in large part the story I tell about it and how I lean into this. I'm a multi-passionate person, and therefore things get done at weird times. And sometimes I work on the weekends, and sometimes I don't. And it doesn't matter which it is, and how beautiful that you can sort of rearrange as works for you in your life if you want to tell that story.
You're bringing up a great point, which is that if you have to schedule self-care things or like things like exercise into your calendar, you shouldn't feel ashamed about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's about, like, what do you tell yourself about what you're doing? You don't have to be like, "Well, I should not have to schedule this, but
Yes.
I am." And also, I wrote my entire book in hours after my daughter went to sleep for, like, 8 months. That is how I wrote that book, and it's the same thing. I could have been sitting there being like, "Oh my gosh, I wish that I didn't have to write this at 8 p.m." Whatever. And instead, it's like, I get to do this right now because earlier today, I was playing at our stream with my
Mhm.
daughter and, playing toys down there and stuff like that. So, yeah, tell yourself a different story if it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, love that. So as we sort of wrap it up, what else do you think is helpful for people who want to, and I'm going to use your language, lean out and live a less ordinary life? If people are these multi-passionate humans who want to embrace something alternative or creative, again, we get to pick the language. What advice or thoughts do you have?
Well, I think it starts with learning as much about yourself as you can. And that usually does take time, as we mentioned before, spending time alone or spending time in stillness. Clarity comes through mindfulness practices and mindfulness exercises. And I know that you know that. And it doesn't have to look like some perfect period of meditation. But if you try on a regular basis to have some quiet time, later on, you will get the clarity from having that time in a particular moment. And all of those times will add up and they will help you to know who you are and what you really want to do. There are other deliberate things you can do. I think a really helpful exercise is people going through just doing their core values. And it
Mhm.
seems very remedial, but it's really important. If you haven't ever done it, I recommend it. On my website, practicebalance.com, you can get a free core values exercise. And that can really help you to figure out what your direction is. If you're in a place where you're like, I really want to be doing something different and I want to use my other gifts besides medicine, but I still kind of want to practice medicine or I need to practice medicine, then figure out what your core values are because that could help you to figure out the direction that you want to go. What do you want to be subtracting or adding? Because you could be adding something on the side that's like a hobby or something that will give you joy that can help your overall work life balance. Or you could be subtracting something. Like maybe there's a role that you have at your work that if you just took that role away, you'd have a little more space in your days to have more joy or to decide what other outside of work thing that you want to pursue. So I'd recommend that. And then the other thing that we haven't talked about yet, because really everything that we've talked about is all related to this topic, but I think is redefining success for yourself. So making sure that you are not using other people's metrics of success. And it's very common and it's very easy to do because common metrics of success are like mathematical and scientific, like you said. It's like your job titles, your how much you make, or things like that. How many, how productive are you? How many RVUs do you do, or stuff like that?
Or
Maybe
even how much money you make.
yes, yes. And I mean, maybe there's other ways that you want to define success for yourself. What does success involve? I like to use a pie graph and make all the pieces of the pie be the things that you care about. And maybe that's like you use your values to label that, but also like, if you have children, that might be part of the pie. Like, am I present for my kids? Are we doing some one-on-one time? Things like that. So, making sure that you know what success looks like for you can be really helpful to be okay, to give yourself permission to do something different than what everybody else is doing.
For me, I think the defining your own version of success is one of the most important things. And I think sometimes we can step out of medicine's version of success, but many of us still carry maybe our parents' versions of success or cultural versions of success. And so really digging into what is success for you and you alone. And maybe if you have a partner, it doesn't even have to be their definition of success. Because you can modify it later, because maybe having a partner who agrees is also a definition of success, or staying in your relationship is part of that. But I think many people really don't recognize how much other people's definition of success, or medicine's, or societal, or their cultural background's definition of success is weighing in. And that is where I think the pause and the stepping out of the norm spaces and having mindfulness is the only way to find that. And one thing I often say, which comes to mind here, which is amusing, is that I have to close my eyes to actually even have any of that information and do hand to heart. Like if my eyes are open, I'm like scanning. This is a very medicine thing. And I can't, I'm thinking, what do people think and what's happening out here? So I have no idea what my definition is. And so part of it is knowing too and learning that. Most of us don't know that. Do we get the information from hand to heart or hand to belly, or do our eyes have to be open or closed? Or maybe you have to be alone, or maybe you have to be in nature, and maybe not even a have to, but maybe it helps. And I think getting creative about that. And both you and I actually lead retreats, and I think that's one of the things about retreats, like is retreating, stepping away from all the noise to figure out your definition of success. That's one of the things that can be so helpful with. I have one last question as we end, which is, I think, once you have this definition of success and you have more clarity, how, so for many people, I find the courage piece is the next piece that's really hard. And I often talk about how do you grow the courage, or how do you find the courage? Or someone said to me recently, like, I just want to live a bold life like you do. How are you brave enough to be so bold? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm curious. I don't know how I do it. I think that it's really a long process of growing courage and growing belief in yourself and connecting to success. But I'm curious because your life strikes me as a courageous, bold life. How did you grow the courage to do that?
It's interesting that you ask this because after I figured out what I wanted to write in my book, and I wrote the book, and it's now 2 years old, and I started the podcast and kept going with the inspirations for people, I decided to write an online course about this exact topic. So, most recently, my most recent offering on my website is a course called the Lean Out Confidence course. And I will first off say that confidence and courage is not something that you're just born with. It's not a personality trait. It's something that we can all learn.
Mhm.
And without going back and rehashing everything that I've said in this
Yeah.
podcast, I think that all of the steps are there.
Yeah.
And some of the things that I mentioned earlier are the modules for my course.
Yeah.
To know yourself better, knowing how you recover, knowing how to care for yourself, learning basic mindfulness tactics and also abilities to question your beliefs, to look at the rules and break them down, to learn emotional agility, which I absolutely love that framework. That's all in there. And then embracing challenge and looking at life as a journey where you're the hero in the journey as opposed to the victim.
Yeah.
Like we are the Luke Skywalkers of our
Yeah.
story. And everything that has happened in the past has meaning, and everything that's happening in the future is going to unfold the way that it's supposed to. And so those are the ways that I figured it out. It's been over the last 13 years or something. I think I had my brain tumor in about 2011. And
Mhm.
this is the life I've been living and the things that I've been doing for personal development myself. And I think that they'll help anyone else who's
Yeah.
trying to cultivate authentic, not just career specific confidence, but confidence that goes across anything that you're doing. It's not skill related.
And I love that it's not skill related and it's not a personal trait, is really the key thing. Like many people will say, well, you must be a courageous person or you must have confidence. And confidence and courage are something we build and grow. And my thought is also, I don't know that there's one path to each of us for confidence. Like it's this meandering, your path and my path to courage and confidence are very different. So I
Yeah.
love that there's like a smorgasbord of options and different ways to get there. And we all find our way to it through trying different things and connecting different things. The other thing you mentioned, which you talked about the hero versus the victim. And in the Martha Beck coach training, she has this whole way of thinking about it as the hero saga. And I think so often in medicine, we're trained to drop into victimhood. And so could we actually like step into, I was going to say herohood, which is not the word heroism, or be the heroine of your life is one of the things I love to think about. And I think if we stepped into that energy, what might become possible?
Absolutely. And the other thing about it is that it's cyclical.
Yes.
So it's always in cycles. So, like, you go on a hero's journey that is maybe learning a new skill or you're embracing a new role or something like that. And that role could be work related or not work related. Maybe you're a new mom or something. And then you learn things. You have trial and errors. You tap into mentors. And then you have this like denouement, and then it starts all over again because there's like a new challenge. So that's like our entire lives. And
Yeah.
I think it's great. I love it.
Yeah. And just this question of like, I might even ask that, like, how was I hero today? Like, even
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the little micro moments, how fun
yeah.
would that be? Just to,
Mhm.
it's like the baby step of acknowledging progress. So this has been such a fun conversation. Tell people if they want to find you and find your book and find your website. And I will put the details in the show notes as well.
Sure. So everything can be found at practicebalance.com. That's my original long-standing blog and website. I have a way to subscribe to my newsletter there. I have a link to my new confidence course that I mentioned. You can get to my Lean Out podcast. That way you can buy the book, basically everything. And I'm also Practice Balance on Instagram, which is where I'm most active on social media.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me. This was such fun. And I am certain we will continue to cross paths and stay connected as we move forward in this multi-passionate, less ordinary life.
Yes, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, We would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.